I'm 28. I know East Cleveland to be like the hood. Like I've heard stories, like it used to be a nice suburban area, nice buildings, everything, but I don't know that. So where did the fall start? Like what time, what era? And also by you being a community leader, someone out there giving back, what do you think steps has to be taken for the younger generation, this next generation coming up, to start doing the same things you're doing, to go back to their neighborhoods where they grew up at, where they went to high schools at, to start these programs, to start also building their neighborhood back up, but also keeping them, if it's still intact and nice, keeping it that way.
Yeah,
Bro,
so
I'm
that's a
gonna be
lot.
honest with you. That's two separate podcasts.
What's up, everybody? It's Willie and Alex from the Black Culture Podcast. I know you ready to get into this video, but before you do that,
Make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast. All right, so today we have a great friend of mine, Mr. Trevelle Harp, who is the executive director of NOAH, which stands for Northeast Ohio Alliance for Hope. It's going to be a lot to unpack this episode, just because he and I have talked so much. He's doing some great things in the city of East Cleveland, which was my old stomping grounds. Willie Ashford, myself, welcome to the Black Culture Podcast.
yes, sir.
Thanks so much for thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, for sure, man. So let's get into you. I want to dig into you as an individual. First question I want to ask you though is
Hold on, whoa.
You're right.
Strike one.
Well, it took us a while to get here. So look, we have this tradition on the Black Culture Podcast where before every episode, we like to toast it up.
Okay. All right. I got a cup of water. Is that cool?
Yes, sir.
There we go. I'm gonna have to give me a black mug though. So
Yeah, man. So, just because of the technical difficulties, it slipped my mind. So, Willie, you're gonna have to forgive me. I was doing so well for the past few weeks.
Man, you was on a nice streak, man. You ended it today.
Yeah, dang. Awful, man.
My fault, man.
Nah, bro, you good. But all right, let's get back. What started your passion for community organizing? Like I've always wanted to know that.
Oh wow. That's a deep question that probably would take me back. I don't want to take too much time on it though, but it really is a deep story. It's just rooted in like my own personal journey as a human being, navigating, elementary school, middle school, high school, my spiritual journey, just looking at the things that affect people and communities and opportunity. So just to fast forward, I really took a love for East Cleveland. I grew up here when I was younger, and I didn't actually, my parents matriculated up to Cleveland Heights. And so, I went to Caledonia, and then I ended up finishing up elementary school at Noble and graduated from Cleveland Heights High, that kind of thing. And then immediately after high school, I started doing CNC programming. And,
hold on, wait a minute. What high school did you say that?
Cleveland Heights High. Don't tell nobody though, because Cardinals and Tigers don't really get along together. But I think that there's a time where we can all work together. But anyway, so just had a journey in my life where I really wanted to make an impact in my people, Black people in particular, and I couldn't understand why predominantly African American community suffered in the way that it did, and so that combined with like my own personal journey, dealing with self-esteem issues, dealing with self-worth, feeling rejected, in different points in my life, I kind of sort of like took that emotional struggle and polarized it to because I could relate to the community of Cleveland. I saw a community that, when you look at Northeast Ohio in general, a very strong market. There's a lot of wealth and money, old money, in Northeast Ohio, and particularly in Cleveland and that kind of thing. But it's not always equitable, and one of the stark contrasts that I saw was the difference between Roland and University Circle, what was thriving even through the recession of 2007, around that time and that kind of stuff. They were doing billions of dollars worth of development. And then you go right into East Cleveland and they're struggling. And so what brought me back to East Cleveland, I was a year into John Carroll, a lot of debt and, kind of poor and that kind of stuff. And a friend of mine who was going to CSU at the time, we decided to actually rent out a house together to, just to, enjoy the summer and that kind of thing. And that experience sort of like made a lot of pivots for me. And so, the house that we stayed on was a house on the street called Howard. And those of you know East Cleveland. And so there used to be a Kentucky Fried Chicken at the intersection of Euclid and Howard, coming right out of the University Circle, and there's that street. And it was probably arguably one of the worst streets in the city. And at that time, one half of the street was the city of Cleveland, the other half was East Cleveland. The street was riddled with vacant and abandoned properties, apartment buildings. There was obvious drug activity happening, on the street. But one thing that sort of like touched me, and I kind of joke around a little bit about it because they had the opposite reaction. Well, it touched my roommate too, but it had an opposite reaction with him. But with me, we stayed in the 2-family house, and there was a single parent grandmother that lived on the first floor, and she was taking care, I believe, of her son's baby, and then a little girl, probably about 7 or 8. And I was just so amazed about how like articulate and how smart and engaging, and it was just like the little girl had a lot of potential. And I always thought about like how are the resources that are right across, probably less than a half a mile away in University Circle, going to be accessible to her and that kind of thing, or people like her in the community. And then so that led to further questions. And so after that summer, I didn't finish up at John Carroll's, just way too much money for me, but I literally transitioned, and there's a whole story in that too, but literally transitioned into East Cleveland and transitioned from being, because I was in technology. I was, I was a machinist that did CNC. I programmed machines to make other machine parts, and I did CAD drawings and all that kind of stuff for a small prototyping shop. And I transitioned to becoming a community organizer. And it's something a little bit different, even in my personality, because I wasn't always sort of like a person that liked to get in front of people and talk or motivate and that kind of stuff. I was more or less, a person, introvert. I watch science fiction. I like Star Trek, that kind of thing. I wasn't really that people person.
Nerd or geek? Which one do you?
Probably a hybrid of them both.
A hybrid. Okay.
A hybrid. But I just realized that the type of innovation and technology and the things that tech and that kind of stuff can't be really beneficial to community if we don't get over our social problems that we have, as far as like just people just having basic opportunity, which is a big thing. Now, so that's like, go ahead.
If you can do me a quick favor for our audience who might not know the history of East Cleveland, which used to be one of the wealthiest communities in the country at one point, can you break down just real quick what East Cleveland was versus what it is now?
Yeah, East Cleveland was the first suburb of Cleveland. Suburbs, basically, when you look at urban history, is a code word for, really segregating community by wealth and class. What I would say by race and class, so very affluent white people wanted to live in different spaces than even other white people, other ethnic groups of white people and that kind of thing. But certainly, there wasn't many Black people that lived here and everything. As a matter of fact, the population of East Cleveland stayed less than 1% white. Less than 1% non-white, not even Black, just non-white, probably into the 1950s, 1960s. And that's when it began to transition. But it's the first suburb of Cleveland. John D. Rockefeller, the world's first billionaire, basically his estate was Forest Hill Park. And, I mean, that speaks volumes in itself. All the conspiracy theories that people say, there's a reason why, out of 11 places where there's a Federal Reserve Bank in this country, there's one in Cleveland.
Hey guys, it's Willie from the Black Culture Podcast. I know you're enjoying this dope interview, but before you continue,
make sure to like, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast.
Because John D. Rockefeller was here. There's also the first suburban industrial park in GE, which is a several acre. I mean, GE was probably one of the other bigger companies, in the world and that kind of stuff. And arguably, even that today, even though they've sold two of the divisions in Nela Park. So let's just say, there's just a lot of wealth and affluence. They had garbage pickup back in the day, about 2 days a week. Imagine them coming right in your backyard, picking up trash twice a week, and that kind of thing. And so East Cleveland was.
They would actually go in the yard and get it.
I believe so. Oh wow! So. And there's like these classic Rockefeller homes in East Cleveland. I would imagine, I think maybe 70% of them are in East Cleveland, and about 30 to 25% are in Cleveland Heights, that were commissioned, I believe, by Rockefeller's son, I want to say, or son-in-law. Well, anyway, so just a lot of history. East Cleveland, well-built infrastructure. If you go in the Forest Hill district, even today, you notice that like there's probably maybe a little bit now, but minimally. I mean, you look up and you kind of like look at the treescape. You won't see any power lines because it was one of the first industrial cities within that part of the city. Because so East Cleveland, even when it was created as a suburb, is divided into different subdivisions. So you're sort of like upper middle class to upper class is up the hill in the Forest Hill district, and then you get to your middle class, alongside between Terrace and Euclid, and then your working class, a little further north down, like the Roselle neighborhoods over there by Chambers over there by Shaw and that kind of stuff.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, it's a two-part question. My first question is, when did you start noticing the fall of East Cleveland? Because like me, I'm 28. I know East Cleveland to be like the hood. Like I've heard stories, like it used to be a nice suburban area, nice buildings, everything, but I don't know that. So where did the fall start? Like what time, what era? And also, by you being a community leader, someone out there giving back, what do you think steps has to be taken for the younger generation, this next generation coming up, to start doing the same things you're doing, to go back to their neighborhoods where they grew up at, where they with the high schools at, to start these programs, to start also building their neighborhood back up, but also keeping them, if it's still intact and nice, keeping it that way?
Yeah,
Bro,
so
I'm
that's
gonna be honest with you. That's two separate podcasts. That is a loaded question.
There's definitely a lot in all of that. The reason why you see me kind of looking at the screen because I literally do presentations on it, and so I want to make sure I give you guys. I got like a PowerPoint that I could just bring up so I can just talk from. But just to answer your last question first. So some East Cleveland right now, there's a lot of opportunity that's available for residents, I believe, even right now. Or people who want to invest in that kind of stuff or get involved. Generally speaking, I'm kind of sad to say that like our people, we've been conditioned to sort of like assimilate with other communities versus finding value in our own community. And just understanding just like from a deeper sense what value is. We look at value when other people think things are valuable, and then they begin to invest in it, and you say, wow, that's valuable, and that kind of stuff. And so then by the time we get that mindset, to go buying it is very expensive for us to become a part of it. But I think that like Black people in general, and particularly our young people, we have to understand that value, that what becomes valuable is the value that you put into it. So if you believe it's valuable and begin to invest in that, then then it's valuable. So that's value. And so I hope that makes sense. But like, so when you think about East Cleveland, there's a lot of opportunity, right? About 30% of the housing stock has been knocked down and everything. There's a lot of housing that's still yet that I believe that has a lot of good bones that you can't even build right now. That like if you bought it for whatever they say, whatever it goes for, like some goes for like maybe 15,000, some maybe go for 40,000, that kind of stuff. And that's not necessarily in the Forest Hill district, that kind of stuff. But if you buy a house like that and then you commit to being there and you put $100,000 into it, then you will have you begin to build that value within the community. And so I guess the first thing I would say is our community, and particularly our young people, our young people who are family oriented or going in that direction, the community that we have, we have to. You have to just go in there and invest and everything. Now, it's a difficult thing to do it by yourself. One of the things that me and Alex talked about, because Noah's a CDC as well. When we get into like doing rehabs and sort of like putting houses in a certain position so that we can actually get into people and that kind of stuff. I would like to be able to like recruit like five or 10 families at a time to literally take over a whole street and actually change the neighborhood and that kind of thing. But I would say my own experience in East Cleveland is kind of, the way I began in, I definitely felt divinely inspired, but I definitely had a lot of, I was naive in a lot of ways to think that like I was impervious to structural concentrated poverty. And so, I bought a house in East Cleveland back in the 2007. Of course, I joke around with a lot of people. It was the worst financial decision I probably made in my life in the sense of, like if you look on a practical sense of like dollars and cents, because what I paid for my house, they say it's worth half of that. The banks say that it's worth half of what I paid for it. But the reality, I think, you go to any other community and you see, if you have a house with picture stained glass windows and woodwork throughout the house and brick construction and all that kind of stuff, that's pretty valuable anywhere else. The reason why, it declined in value is because where is that kind of thing. And so, I think it took a lot of commitment on my end and just blind faith to actually, to make that step. But I believe that it's paying off. And so even though I joke around and say that's probably the worst financial decision in my life, I think it's the best thing that ever happened to me because it helped me grow as an individual, as a person, as a human being. And not only that, but like, I really believe that like, just a couple more people coming in and really believing in the community and believing that, I think it's more or less our people believing in ourselves to come in and like change the landscape, instead of like choosing to live other places and that kind of stuff. There are pros and cons in dealing with that, but I would say just come and do. And I think the other big thing is there's a tendency for people to come, and I've experienced it multiple times. People don't seem to believe the sincerity of the work that we do outside the community. Some people see it and some people don't, that kind of thing. But you get this sort of like this arrogant sort of like spirit, whereas like, I don't want to see what's already going. I want to start something new. And our people has to stop doing that. Like really, if there's organizations or groups of people or initiatives that are going that are already being successful, don't start nothing new, tap right into it. And there's a lot of really good things that's happening in the community now.
So one thing you and I talk about often is Black men as leaders in the community. And you just mentioned 5 to 10 families coming in, taking over street by street. And I've always believed that the family is the root of power in any community. And you see it in other communities. Other communities watch us just like we watch them. And to build a strong community, it takes family. So I want you to dive into that a little bit. The conversation as far as the Black man not being present so much in our community, from the work that you do and that you see to the building up again of the Black family and how it will make our community stronger.
Yeah. So I definitely, I say this because I have a passion for, really creating pathways for leadership for Black men. I think that is very important, even though like, you're sort of like I guess the popular narrative now is anything but that, but I really believe that, like, foundation of a family, the foundation, the way that, I believe biblically that God has ordained family to operate, that kind of stuff. A weak man is not an option. We need men to stand up. We need men to take responsibility for their family. We need men to take responsibility for, our women and respect them, and to, basically, love, nurture, and protect, our family and our women. Marriage, I believe, is important. All those types of things. And I mean, when you look in community, you definitely see a lacking of that. I mean, it's been dismantled so badly that, like, now, like, even the national narrative around, like, Black people in general and what we have to do to survive. Everything. I love women, and I think it's okay that we have Black women power and that kind of stuff too. But you can't overlook Black men. I mean, if you look at the stats around employability, around finishing college or finishing high school, or getting a job, or incarceration, or mortality rates. I mean, you name it. I mean, Black men have the worst stats than any other group of people, and that kind of thing. And I think that there's something that, like, it's shameful that, like, it's not nothing is not really spoke about, even when you speak, you listen to the politicians, or public officials or politicians, the president, senators, and the national level, or even the local level, talk about. But maybe it's not their responsibility. Maybe it's our responsibility to develop our own narrative about what we want and push those types of things. But I know certainly with it built in the work that I do here at NOAA, I have a special heart for developing Black men, and so that's I don't know if that answers your question or anything, but if you want to, like, jump in with that.
It kind of leads back to Alex and I. We had a conversation earlier, and it's like, within this pandemic, you'll be amazed how many young Black people started businesses. Like, the pandemic really started. So you have a generation of, let's say, in the next 15 to 20 years, you're going to have a lot of Black owned businesses, because, Black people, for the most part, during this pandemic they got out there and they got their grind, and they started their own business. So now definitely Black men. So, and they feel the pressure. They see us coming. They know we're coming. So I feel like the quickest way to tear a man down and to get to us is to get to the women.
Yeah.
So,
and not only that, but, like, make men feel useless.
Exactly.
Within, that's a tool that's been used, even, a tool to like break us apart, even during slavery. Consequently, like, everybody knows, I think, if you think about this thing at all, and you actually, like, look at our history, post-slavery, there were stronger families, until you got up to, like, maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s, and that kind of stuff, where things began to get broke down. And there were structural things put in place, I believe, that intentionally, attacked, the very fabric of family within our communities and that kind of stuff.
And can you shed some light on those things? Because it was every decade, it was a new weapon of mass destruction to destroy the Black family.
Yeah. So I'm not an expert, but I would say, drugs being brought into our communities and that kind of stuff. You could say, well, there's a lot of Black people that sell drugs and go to jail for it, right? Well, but statistically speaking, if you look at Michelle Alexander's work, I can't even remember the name of the book right now, but, like, she points out
Jim Crow.
The New Jim Crow, yeah.
Yep.
She breaks it down how, like, things became criminalized intentionally to sort of, like, attack different groups of people and that kind of thing. Beginning with the Asian community that came in here and were working on the railroads and that kind of stuff, all the way to Black people in general and everything. But I think when, like, things like crack cocaine got into our communities and everything, I don't think that, like, there's a lot of Black people who own the boats that brought the stuff over. There's some like I said, I'm not an expert with it, but there were some notions of even our government getting involved and putting drugs on the streets in communities, our communities, and everything, to fund wars overseas and that kind of stuff. I think, the mass incarceration sort of like thing where, Black men, can commit a crime, and another group of people, or, white men or women can commit a crime, and like the sentence would be like much, much more harsh, really breaking up the family. All those different types of things, just the way that like, public assistance come to help communities and that kind of stuff, that sort of like puts us in a place where there's an incentive not to have a man in the house, in order to get public assistance and that kind of thing. I think all those things sort of like broke down. And then I think just a straight, divestment in the development of Black men in education. I mean, even myself, part of the struggle I had with self-esteem was dealing with, I was one of those Black males, started off in East Cleveland public schools, went to Cleveland Heights public schools and everything, and targeted, you say, hey, this dude needs to be on Ritalin. This dude has attention deficit disorder, or, being singled out, being not invested in. I can even remember, going to Heights and knowing that, like, seeing that, okay, how come I only see all the white kids doing lunch, and not realizing that, like, they tracked me and the kids that, the other black boys and girls, for that matter, through one track and in one direction, through as far as like opportunity and different types of classes that they take, and then the white kids go to another, and then the kids that had that they said had issues, they had something called Taylor Academy back then, which was about 98% Black, and so it's like,
yeah, we called that the bad school. That's what we call Taylor.
Yeah. Those types of things, I think there's so many different mechanisms. I know I'm probably getting off point, but like, I think that, it's just a very complex sort of like, system that has many parts to it. But nevertheless, I think that we can clearly see now that, like, even when, I guess Black men and women we're getting shot by police and that kind of stuff all over the country. And I don't think it just started to happen, but I think the power of social media to sort of like expose a lot of different things, kind of like, show that it's still happening, that kind of thing. But like no major attention on how do we invest in Black boys in school? How do we change the way education is catered towards Black boys? Because I think that I think that they learn differently than girls and that kind of stuff. How do we make them more successful? How do we stay with them? How do we develop into leaders? Right now, it's not popular for men to be leaders now. It's just not. Although the expectation is there. And so to me, dealing with the things that I see in community firsthand, my passion is whenever I can to sort of like really try to speak into the lives of young Black boys and that kind of stuff. And that really goes into sort of like the spiritual aspect of the work I do, because, around that time when I came to East Cleveland, I was running from God too, in a sense. And not everybody is spiritual, and so may not understand the particular part. But I realized that the work that I do in community can't be successful, without divine intervention. And so, I realized that because I see it, because even speaking to some of the young people that I speak to, there's only a lot of ways. There's been so much, pain and that they've endured that is only going to be God that brings them out. Even by like trying to. It's like they're like, some of the people are like their minds are just not there. There's not even thinking, that kind of stuff. And so, I just believe God makes a difference for that. And so I'm getting away from that. I think it's probably, speaking about Deuteronomy 28, I know if you read Deuteronomy 28, well, if you're not familiar with it, Fred Hammond, sings the song "Blessed in the City, Blessed in the Fields," et cetera, and that kind of stuff. But there's another portion of that that says that talks about like, well, if you don't put God first, these are things that happens. And it literally, in my opinion, like, describes East Cleveland, or, you go anywhere where, you see a dysfunction within the community, that kind of stuff. I mean, you kind of see it. And so, yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack in that. And man, we'd love to have you back to kind of talk about that. But I think there's so much in that, because a lot of us don't understand the indirect weapons of mass destruction from the media. You mentioned social media. That can also be a weapon. The music that our kids listen to, the movies they watch, the push to be a professional athlete. There's a lot to unpack there in almost every part of our lives. But I want to get into the work that you do with Noah. You mentioned about your passion and how you started. What caused you to take that leap, form your own CDC, and kind of go into the work that you do and how you're helping to impact the community in a positive way?
Yeah. So I mean, that's so you guys have, I just got my mind positioned around to give you guys what happened in East Cleveland, and I got the PowerPoint up, but talking about Noah, and so Noah wasn't always like what it is right now. As a matter of fact, it was an organization that was established back in '97, way before me. It was a congregational based, a faith-based organizing entity that organized faith-based institutions to address social justice issues throughout Northeast Ohio. It was a combination of like churches and mosques and everybody in between, basically, to organize around like social justice issues. And so familiar to GCC, the Greater Cleveland Congregations. One of the things that they, to be honest, the organizing process in general is a very exhausting sort of like thing to do, year in, year out, and that kind of thing. And I think to my understanding, my predecessor, his the leadership team that he worked with, basically decided that they actually wanted to have a little bit more tangible influence on they wanted more tangible outcomes than just convening big public meetings with really important people and talking about social justice issues and pontificating about proposed solutions and that kind of thing, and maybe or maybe not winning things. They actually wanted to actually engage a community, and so that's why they decided to come to Communities Cleveland, and that's where they sort of like met me. And I can remember back in, I believe it was like '08. My predecessor, who very talented organizer, was a white guy though. His name was Jason Lair. He was working. I learned about the meeting from leadership program that I was going through called Neighborhood Leadership Institute. And one of the facilitators, Jackie Gillen, basically told me about Noah being in Communities Cleveland. And so I actually went to one of the meetings that they had. And one thing I noticed about East Cleveland was that there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of passion, a lot of great people. But what kind of like make that kind of like messy is there's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of frustration. That's sort of like and within that frustration is sort of like a spirit of cannibalism, whereas like people basically attack each other, not really understanding the structures that creates the challenges that they see. And not only that, but like, they're not really organized in a strategic way to actually address them. And so this guy was basically going up, and it was about maybe 20 Afro-American, mostly seniors, at this church, meeting with this organizer. And he was basically making a proposition to them, basically saying, hey, we want to teach you guys community organizing skills that will allow you to more strategically address the challenges that you have and everything in the community. And like, we want to like work with you guys to lead campaigns actually addressing these challenges, that kind of stuff. And so here's a white guy from, he lives in Cleveland Heights now, but like, making this proposition to, these Afro-American, mostly seniors and that kind of thing. And, there was basically like, we don't trust you and all that kind of stuff. And so I got up and I said, whether you trust him or not, if he can teach us how to organize ourselves in a strategic way to address the challenges that we face in a way that's productive and the way that actually will yield some type of outcome that's positive, we should take them on that, because no matter what happens, if we learn how to do this, then we have that skill set. And so, I gave this proverbial "I have a dream" speech, and didn't think it was that significant. But at the end of that meeting, he basically offered me a job, and I was like, at the time, I was like, well, I don't know. And I asked a friend of mine who was a union organizer, and I really didn't even know what organizing was, and didn't even know that that's what he did, that kind of stuff. But he said, "Man, you should think about it." And so, I ran into the guy again, and he kind of asked me again, but a little threat behind, like, please, that kind of stuff. And so I agreed to take it. I transitioned from, the world of, working in the machine shop, making prototype machine components and that kind of stuff, to community organizing. And so I would say my start date was right after the Obama election, because, in 2008, nothing happened but Obama, right? And then, then I started after that, November 17th of 2008. And then shortly after that, my predecessor, he resigned and recommended to the board that I take over the organization. And then what also happened was sort of like the congregational base that typically supported NOAA, so kind of like, they didn't really walk, they kind of walked away, but because the heart of the organization became East Cleveland residents, because I believe we became really successful at doing neighborhood organizing.
I wanted to ask you that. So when you took over and you got in there, like, how did the community accept you? Like, how did they how were they towards you? And also, like, what was one of the first things you wanted to tackle and get into once you took over?
So a lot of things. One, I think that many people thought the organization outside of East Cleveland, I think many people thought the organization was just going to fall and everything. And so when my predecessor left, it was like, okay, well, make it work if you can. This is like, when the captain, makes somebody else captain to the ship. Was that?
It was like a lack of support.
It was just a lot of things going on that it was up to me to sort of make the organization work. And literally we repurposed the organization. It's not like it was before. The heart of the organization is East Cleveland residents, predominantly African-American community. That's the organization now, versus congregations throughout, the region and that kind of stuff. That was one thing. And so I think the community actually received me well. One, because I'm an East Cleveland resident. I think that had a lot to do with it. I think that people, especially our older population, because if you look at most organizing groups, seniors actually put in a lot of work, that kind of thing. And I think they saw a young Black man really trying, and they had a lot of grace for me. And so they wanted to see things be successful. And so as far as my interactions with these communities, Cleveland, I think that they really supported, the work. And then when they actually saw things getting done because of the organizing, I think that built more momentum. So within the organizing structure, the first thing you do is a listening campaign to kind of surface issues and everything. And so we listening campaigns, probably maybe about 100 one-to-ones, one-on-one meetings with people, individual meetings, and and then meetings, group meetings, that kind of stuff, where you talk to residents and so come on to consensus of the top issues that a community has and everything. And for East Cleveland at that time, it was abandoned vacant properties, crime and safety in schools, and that kind of stuff. And so the first task I had as an organizer was actually going into schools and do parent patrols and everything. But there's a lot of different things with that, a lot of bureaucracy and everything that kind of slowed that thing down. But what I realized early on, that now the most opportune issue that we had was how we address these vacant and abandoned properties. And that was sort of our claim to fame, of as far as really coming up with a strategy to get millions of dollars of resources from the region to help address vacant abandoned properties in East Cleveland. And from that led, strategic demolition strategies where we include residents to basically stabilize their streets by, eliminating vacant properties on their street. Well, with the power of, at that time it was neighborhood stabilization program dollars. There was stimulus dollars for basically to deal with, vacant abandoned properties. There's hardest hit funds. There's the property demolition fund, and then there was the Coward County Land Bank as well. That basically is this community development corporation on steroids that's powered by tax delinquent revenue. That's only job is to go and repurpose land so that it can begin to generate tax revenue again, that kind of stuff. So that's a lot of big academic stuff, but nevertheless, we were able to leverage that so that East Cleveland right now, there's a lot of potential for development, because we've cleared away a lot of public nuisance properties and been able to assemble, big lots of land that we can market for development. That kind of so that was sort of like the big claim to fame for us. But you asked the question a little bit about like what happened to East Cleveland to make it to where it's at right now. And so I got a couple of stats up on my screen right now. I know you can't see it, but I'll just say it. So the 1950s, East Cleveland's population was a little bit north of 40,000 people, and it had less than 1% non-white population and everything. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's Black, it's just non-white. And then in the 1960s, it was less than 2% non-white. And then in the 70s, there's a coined term by Dennis Keating, who was a professor at CSU, who wrote a book, The Racial Urban Dilemma. And basically he calls it resegregation. So that happened in the 1970s. So between the 1970s and the 1990s, East Cleveland population went, well, for 1960s and 1970s, East Cleveland's population went from less than 2% non-white to the 1970s, which is about 10 years, to about 67% Black, until between the 1970s and 1990s, it went to 94% Black. And now we're like about 91% Black in East Cleveland right now. And so you may say, okay, because, so is that the reason why East Cleveland went down, because it became Black? No. During that time, and I think this is a point that's always like looked over, because I hate to think that, just because people resegregate a community to being Black, then that means that it's going to go downhill. What happened was during that time, just like everybody else, Black people with means actually left the community of East Cleveland, leaving only seniors and people who didn't have means and everything. So they were urban sprawl, they were sprawling out too. But there was a time in East Cleveland that there was a lot of Black businesses and a lot of like just Black families that lived in East Cleveland and that kind of stuff. And so East Cleveland not only suffered from white flight, but it suffered from class flight as well and that kind of thing. And that stuff was exploited by the real estate industry and other things. And of course, like some of the bad political decisions that were made, kind of like lent a hand into making East Cleveland a little bit less desirable to live too. And then so just looking at the population, I'm looking at the population graph right now. And so I said in 1950s, the population was about north of 40,000 people, with roughly about like between 18 to 20,000 people actually working in the city. If you did if you did the goodness, it's just a term where you factor how much money will be that people made in the household in the 1950s comparable to now. So the average household comparably would have been like around like 50,000 equivalent, that kind of stuff. And so when you fast forward to the 1920s, the population went down to 17,000 people, roughly, give or take, and with about 5,000 people in the entire city working. And so you could see tax revenue just left. And so there's a bunch of sort of like things that happened, blockbusting steering practices of realtors that exploited racial anxiety. At that time, Black people moving to the community was kind of like a really big thing. And so There was no but East Cleveland at that time was like kind of automatic. As a matter of fact, the city manager kind of ran everything and controlled the politics. So it had minimal community like engagement. And so there's no significant active independent civic organization to offer alternative leadership to help the community to actually change, address the challenges that it had, which makes me feel good about Noah being here. And then I think that there is there's a lot of things like just dealing with managing or addressing race relationships in East Cleveland. And then I think there's a missed opportunity to recruit more working class and affluent African Americans. And then there's a term called filtering, whereas people move out of their house, housing value goes down, and then people get in a house where they can't really afford to keep it up, and so the housing stock goes down as well. And then the financial distress began sort of like in 1998 when East Cleveland went into, well, it didn't begin there, but it was there, where East Cleveland entered in fiscal emergency for the first time. Now is in fiscal emergency again. It probably should never went out if you actually study the stats and everything. But then in 2003, this is a significant thing. So East Cleveland was expecting roughly about $8 million in property tax that it didn't receive. It's because people literally just walked away from their homes and that kind of thing. And so that drastically affected the city's ability to be able to provide basic city services. And then of course the population, declined from, being, peaking at 40,000 to about 17,000 people and that kind of stuff. And so, so those are some of the things that happen, that kind of thing.
So real quick before we let you go, and that is, I know you've got your slides and everything there, but we definitely gonna have to do another episode, because one of the things that we talk about is when we get our paycheck, how much of it are we circulating within the community, right? And I'm not talking about charity or we may build a school or form a grant or something. I'm talking about your normal everyday needs, the things that, so when Black people usually move, like you said, because East Cleveland didn't just suffer from white flight, it also suffered from Black flight too. The affluent Blacks, right? Yeah, the class flight, they moved to white neighborhoods, and when they left, their money went with them. So they probably weren't continuing to spend money in the city of East Cleveland versus in the new areas that they lived at that time. But before we let you go, I want to ask you this last question. And it's kind of a two-part, but you can answer it as you will. One, do you think East Cleveland will benefit from annexation with the city of Cleveland? And number two, where do you see East Cleveland with the work that you're doing in the next 10 to 20 years? And if you can just hit those points real quick.
Yeah, so annexation is definitely a very, very complex and controversial subject, depending on, and especially depending on your perspective, because if you look first in and that kind of stuff, you may say, well, I don't want East Cleveland annexed because it's a predominantly African community or anything. But when you look at patterns of cities throughout Northeast Ohio and across the country for that matter, East Cleveland was created to insulate wealth, right? And so that's why they created 3.2 square mile area and everything, and they made it a city, and they were able to have their own school district and benefit from the property tax that they generate without giving it to anybody else. They were able to have their city services, amenities, and that kind of stuff. But now, the municipal boundaries that we have insulates poverty, basically, there's a lot of resources that we try to actually go after and everything that are not in East Cleveland, and so, the answer, and so although we have people power, and I think, and that goes a long way to actually leverage resources in the community, but the money and the resources in that wise, they got to come from outside the community of East Cleveland. And so what we've seen of late, beginning, I believe, with Governor Kasich, where the state, they basically took a different lean on how they redistribute local government funds to cities. They've been giving local cities a lot less. And so it's becoming more difficult to support urban sprawl and autonomous cities operating in silos throughout Northeast Ohio. in an isolated way. In other words, so not only is it costing East Cleveland more to be able to occupy, I mean, to act as a independent city. Same thing with Cleveland Heights, who have to raise, I believe, property tax or income tax. Lakewood, same thing. Other communities. I mean, it's becoming more expensive to be an autonomous city, and so, I'm hopeful, but I'm thinking that it's probably inevitable that East Cleveland will have to look at annexation. But I think the opportunity that we have is, I mean, when I look at things like University Circle, right? University Circle is an institution that's created over 100 years ago, and they came up with a vision for what they wanted for that piece of land that they got and everything with the institutions that make up University Circle. And they've been able to adhere to that vision and grow that vision over the last 100 years, and they've done a great job. Now, if you ask them who they are their own city? I said, no, they have their own police though, right? They have their own services. Things act differently in University Circle than it acts in other communities, right? And the reason why is because they have a vision for that community, and they have an institution, UCI, that basically drives that vision with the help of its partner and anchor institutions within that community. And so what I would say is that, to me, I look at, the difference between, having a city or having control of development and economic infrastructure is two different things. And I think that it can be preserved through an organization like NOAA that actually looks to create opportunity structures for the indigenous population and everything. If we can sort of like establish a vision for the community and gather the resources to facilitate that in a way that a UCI does, that's a lot more powerful than controlling a city that has no resources and are locked out from the resources that are in the region. Because like I said, this Northeast Ohio is very market strong, but it's a matter of, how can you connect to those resources? And so UCI University Circle being an area where they drive all this economic, activity, but they're a part of the city of Cleveland, which means they get money from the city of Cleveland. They're part of the county, they're part of the state. They benefit from all those different factors, but because they have an institution in place that facilitates the type of development and the type of growth that they want to see, then they're very successful in driving their own economy. And so the vision I have for East Cleveland is sort of like, to me, transcends local politics and municipal boundaries in a way. Like, I mean, what I'm trying to build, within NOAA is as avenue for, people of color to be able to access opportunity and build an economy that benefits the people that live here, that benefits, our people. And so I guess the call to action is, who else is willing to buy into that vision and invest, not build something new, but tap into something that is already being built. Because one, it takes a lot of energy to get to this point. Like I've been here for 12 years, over 12 years, doing this work and everything, and getting to the point now where just not being able to see the opportunity, seeing this thing come to fruition. But I mean, it takes a lot of time to actually get that going. That's a lot, I know. I maybe the next meeting I won't be so talkative, man, but
Nah, bro, you good.
Yeah.
Man, you this was good. I feel like
awesome.
This episode is going to impact and going to be very important to all Black communities. Everyone needs to hear this. Definitely how you broke down how to build up your community. But thank you for your time. Thank you for taking the time out of your evening to sit with us, to give us some knowledge. We definitely gonna set up a part 2 so we can really dig deep into the meat of
it. Yep.
Yeah. This one was kind of like freestyle. We got a lot of great points out of this.
This is how it is whenever we talk. I feel like I'm the student and Trevelle is the teacher, right? So I mean, no, but honestly, man, love your passion, love what you do, love what you stand for, love the fact that unlike so many others, you haven't given up on the city of East Cleveland, which is a city that I also grew up in. I told you this, my grandfather stayed right on Roselle. I went to Roselle as a kid. So I'm very, very familiar with the city, very familiar with the history of the city. and somebody who has taken the initiative to want to sort of give it a rebirth, that you can look at this blank canvas and say, okay, we can build this the same way they took a desert and built Las Vegas, right? The same way they took just a beachside shanty town and built Miami, the same way they built all these other phenomenal cities because somebody had vision. So shout out to you, man. Congratulations on what you're doing. You got a group of guys who are willing to pitch in, help and support. We definitely gonna get back to the beat down.
Yeah.
So,
I want to say this. I really appreciate you, Alex. And so, Willie, I don't know if you know, Alex dedicated some time to actually start this sort of like the beat down in East Cleveland that basically gets young and old men out, and is, to number one, really challenge their bodies as far as getting back in shape, because I think that's important. That's one thing that, like, I hate when we look at the different stats, even around like this coronavirus thing, that kind of stuff. And our community seems to be the last one to actually like realize we need to do something about our health and we need to take things seriously. But he came out and so like showed us how to work out, and it was hard. It really is the beat down and everything. But like, I think that even though like we had to stop because the weather changed and that kind of stuff, and we got big crowds sometimes, and sometimes we didn't get big crowds. But I think it really sort of like ignited. It was a catalyst in a lot of the young men that we worked with for them to realize that they need to really think a little bit more deeply about like, where their life is going, and that like blowing in the wind is not a plan, is not effective. And so hopefully we can keep that up going into 2021. I look forward to it, and God bless you for that. And then just thank you for allowing me to be here. I try to speak in ways that is not so long-winded and is just basic and plain. But like, you get me start talking about something I'm passionate about, it could be for days. But just thanks for the patience, and thanks for having me on.
no, sir. Thank you. And Willie, you got anything?
Nope. Just make sure you guys like and subscribe to our YouTube channels, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at the Black Culture Podcast.